Life is both simple and complex. Our past links us to our present and future. Some of us know our role and purpose. Most of us are trying to figure it out. Join me. Let's figure it out together. Welcome back. Fritz here, the Ask Dr. Fritz show. In this episode, I will be interviewing an author who I've just recently read his book, and we'll be talking about the book and about a number of issues that are raised by the book. So let me just jump right into the conversation with author W.N. Bunche.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you.
All
right. I just wanted to bring you right in. Every day I work as a psychologist. I talk to people about their experiences. I've worked with a number of authors, both professionally and personally. And I always like to talk at length with people about their experiences and how their experiences contribute to the work that they do and the passions that they have. And in reading your book, I read a lot of books. And one of the things that I found that in reading your book, I had to slow down to really get into the feeling of the book and really get into the characters. So let's jump into the book. The name of the book is Mercy's First Semester. And let's start with, just the usual question. What prompted you to write this book?
Well, I thought that there was a need to discuss what goes on with soldiers' lives in war, pre-war and after war, and particularly soldiers of color. So that inspired me. Me being a veteran, I had not served in combat. I want to really focus on people who have served in combat and just get a very good idea and relay that to people who may not have a clue as to what goes on.
And I work with veterans, both combat and non-combat, and it's very difficult to get them to open up and talk. Yes. And the character that you describe in the book, Mercy,
yes.
I don't want to give too much away because we've got to get this book, but very interesting character. And one, he's Haitian in origin, and I was wondering, because your description of him as a Haitian and some of the background material is spot on. What in your background or in your research to write this character allowed you to do such a great job?
I've always been fascinated with different aspects of the diaspora. And that was one aspect I thought, the Haitian aspect, was pretty powerful. Just the legend and the history of Toussaint Louverture. Mm-hmm. And that attracted me, because there's this pride in the history, and then there's this accomplishment of when immigrants come here. And that was very appealing to me. So that's what really attracted me to placing him as a Haitian immigrant.
Okay, that's just very interesting. And Mercy, as a veteran, has, as many veterans do, an experience coming back from combat and reintegrating into civilian society. And as you read the book, you really can get into what it's like for him and to interact with not only family and relationships that he's in, as well as interacting with the VA. So let's talk more about that, about the message you're trying to get out to the public, because many of us who've never served in combat have no idea what it's like to come back from war.
Well, with the VA, I want to just focus on some of the programs or some of the challenges soldiers have when they come back, and how they integrate into society, as well as how, if they suffer from PTSD, how the PTSD affects people in their close circles. And I thought that was a very interesting area to investigate, because I've run across a good many soldiers who have PTSD, and it's very interesting, considering that me coming from a non-combat area, just to see what they're going through, because the media focuses always on the combat side, and I didn't know enough, and I figured, let me dig into this, and it was very intriguing.
Mm-hmm. And I heard you say earlier when we were talking about how you're following the character and the characters through the stages.
Yes.
And can we talk about those stages?
Yes. I thought that I wanted to kind of create things like a bell curve, where basically you have this level where you come in and then you peak, and then you go back to the sense of normalcy. And I wanted to cover different people, the different characters, and how they were at different levels of sense of normalcy as well as a sense of trauma, and then back to a sense of normalcy, or so-called normalcy in the case of Mercy. So I wanted to just touch upon different people and just show how PTSD, the war, and the other aspects of it, how it affects different people at different stages.
And you touched upon Mercy's life before he goes away. You talked a little bit about him being in high school.
Yes.
And then the experiences of combat. You also introduce a few other characters in the story and the arc of their experience as they go through. In particular, there was a character that was an intelligence person.
Yes.
Yes. And can we talk a little bit about that character in particular, because I think you've got some personal experience with that character.
Yes, we're talking about Scott.
Yes.
Scott is a good buddy of Mercy. My background, I have a background in intelligence. I worked in an intel field for 6 years. I was a Morse code operator, and I worked on satellite imagery. And sometimes we were known as freaks and geeks to the other MOSs or AFSCs because we're very technical, and we're behind the scenes, but we kind of control what goes on before the actual levels of combat, because they don't know where to go unless we provide the information. So it's a very integral part. Scott was a buddy of his. They've known since childhood that Mercy went the combat route and Scott went the intelligence route. So it was kind of a contrast in experiences, but yet it was a symbiotic relationship as well. So that kind of intrigued me, because the military is so huge. This military is, I think, it's about 2 million people in the military, about 1.7 active, and about 300,000 that are reserves and guard. So it's a very huge organization, but yet we're so interconnected. And sometimes I think the media only focuses on the combat area, the combat areas, and that I wanted to kind of show that there are other areas that require some attention that the media may overlook at times.
Yeah. I mean, through movies and through film and media in general, we are most exposed to the combat veteran, and when the first thing that comes to our mind are bullets flying, missiles flying.
That's right.
And there's 2 million people in the military. And so there are so many people who are behind the scenes, who are involved in all that goes into that small part of military life, which is combat.
That's right.
And this character, and then also your professional experience in intelligence, combat is an ongoing thing.
Yes, it
and
is.
It's often overlooked in our media. I guess we could talk more about the importance of that, because in everyday media now, we hear a lot about intelligence, whether it's wrong, whether it's right.
That's right.
Weapons of mass destruction, that sort of thing. And we should probably talk a little bit more about the importance of understanding how intelligence and how it's used in everyday military.
Well, intelligence is always something that goes on. It's a 24/7 thing. Yeah. And it's probably underrated because it's not the dirty work. It's not the media-friendly or the sexy part of combat. And serving, when you serve, first of all, we're in a war every day. It's just that every role is not a combat role. I've had friends I've grown up with since elementary school. Some of them have worked on nukes. Some of them were recruiters. Some of them were infantry. It was a variety of different specialties that they have served in different capacities. But it's a big team effort. So I think often with the media, sometimes the media focuses, they can be on a micro level where they only focus on the combat level and the people who die, but yet there's people who are serving. There probably are maybe 8 or 10 support people for every one combat position. So you have so many people behind the scenes that are making things happen, whether it's a medic, whether it's a person who's loading the weapons, whether it's a driver, whether it's a gunner. And sometimes it's not so, sometimes I think the media does these things in terms of for brevity and for it to be to the point, as opposed to putting a macro level and get very detailed and very focused on the big picture.
Yeah. Well, the general public has a very limited understanding
Yes.
of all that goes behind it. He said, for every person on the front line, there's a lot of other people behind the scenes.
Correct, that is correct.
And with a lack of awareness of that, then we have military veterans returning from
Yes.
combat. There's also a lack of awareness of how to help them integrate. And often people are released from the military without enough preparation in order to be ready to integrate themselves back into everyday life.
That's correct.
And so it's really interesting study to read your book and to read about these characters, because not only are we following the protagonist of the story, Mercy, through his experiences and through his experiences with the VA and with other civilians and family, we're following other people in his life that are also affected by his reintegration into society, as well as other the person that, and I kind of identify with this, one of the other main characters in the story is a therapist, a social worker that works with veterans and is often always trying to save them all, probably to a certain extent to the detriment of his own personal life.
That's correct.
And you and I talked before about having that perspective where people don't know this, but often we work so long and hard with characters like that, with people like that, that we need to see our own people.
That's right. That is right. And I think that's what I wanted to try to focus on, just show that PTSD, it affects people in different routes. And one of the characters, Mr. Mina, is a social worker, but he basically had to see someone himself to keep a balance. He wants to be involved in really helping this person become quote unquote normal or close to normal as possible. And I felt that was important because these are the people that when the young men and women do come back, they're kind of the unsung heroes. And you know, we see veterans on the street who are homeless or have signs that say they need assistance, and sometimes there are many stories behind each one, because each one has a unique experience, and each one experience, whether it's combat or not, is unique. So that was one of the things that pushed me towards talking about writing this book, because we need to see a different perspective from a narrative that's being projected by the media. And but I really, but Mr. Mina was definitely, I thought it was very necessary to give us a little introduction as to, let's see about the people who are trying to help these people, and how are they intertwined, and to what level, and what limits do they go to try to save their people. So that's what I tried to create that type of that narrative.
And what was the general feeling that you had as you were writing the book? And imagine doing the research for the book, because like I said, some of these characters, you're hitting them spot on in terms of my experience from being of Haitian descent, and you got us down pretty well. So you must have done some pretty good research there. And I imagine as we go through some of the other characters in the book, what was your feeling as you were writing it? What were you hoping would happen?
I wanted to be authentic as possible.
Yeah.
And in doing so, I had to do a lot of listening and recording. And the emotions, I had an array of emotions going through my mind and just feelings. Because I've heard about war, I've seen the consequences of war, and you see people walking around, the homeless brothers and ancestors, and that impacted me. But to sit and listen to actual experiences, that was heavy. Because it was just kind of like, whoa, you experienced this. You know, my experience was a ice cream sundae compared to this experience. So I was kind of shocked. I was hurt also, because I kind of put myself in the place of the soldier and his experience, and I tried to empathize the best way I could, or sympathize both, to put myself in their shoes.
to give a person an opportunity to tell their story
Yes.
is the work that I often do with people. A lot of therapy with people is just giving them a safe space
Right.
to open up and talk about their experiences, which can be quite cathartic.
Yes.
And as you listen to it all, it could also be quite heavy, as
Yes.
you experience in doing the research.
Yes.
I'm wondering, when you were interviewing people, did you also see their own release? Did they experience catharsis in your presence?
Most definitely. Most definitely. This book started off as a writing assignment, and one of the gentlemen I work with volunteered to work with me. Typically, what I found is a lot of combat veterans, especially the frontline people, they're not going to talk. They don't want to hear any hero talk. They just figure, look, I did my job, and I'm just trying to cope with my job, and I kind of want to put it behind me. But in this particular case, this gentleman, once we related and we met and had established a rapport, he agreed, okay, well, I'll help you out, because it'll help me, and it'll help you.
He knew it would help him to open up.
That's right. And that I found was it was generous, but I felt like, wow, because he was at a stage, this was when he had just come back maybe a year or two. He was still attending counseling sessions. And he was going through his motions. He still had flashbacks. He was taking medicine to keep himself composed. So it was a scenario where I could see and I could feel, and I could see his demeanor over time. I could see him become more at ease.
Yeah.
And it was just like, the more he talked about it, the better he felt. It's funny, the more he talked about it, the better he felt. I felt in the opposite, like, whoo, how do I deal with this? Because I'm thinking, how would I put myself in the shoes saying, I don't know if I could deal with this. I don't know where I would be if I experienced this situation, if I killed somebody, or even though it was my job. So those are part of the emotions and feelings that I was experiencing as I wrote and did my research.
And often people who are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder are experiencing and re-experiencing the events and the experiences that cause the original trauma.
That's correct.
For veterans, often it's repeated events over and over again.
Correct.
That they're having to experience in combat or in war situations, and then having to go back to civilian society where none of that is present.
Correct.
And then feeling all that inside, looking for a place, a person to express themselves.
Correct.
And so I always like when I find that people have done a piece of work that I really admire, is creating that space and creating a body of work that then allows the veteran to see that others were able to open up and tell their story.
I'm the way you place it. I never would have thought that I created a space for him, but I did. I tried to make it as. I really tried to be a friend.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. Be a friend, and because we worked in fields that were complementary, we could talk and talk about certain things as well. You did this part. Now this is where I come into the game, and then. It felt good, you reminisce, it felt good in some ways, but also what it did is it made me put pieces of the puzzle together to understand things on a macro level, and I understood my role a lot better as well. So it was very helpful for both of us on many different places, and I was just, I'll be honest with you, I thank God for putting me in that position, because I don't know if he would have had the same relationship with everyone. And so I feel grateful. I feel grateful. I feel blessed. And, I think it was a win-win for both of us, so it was.
Now, there's a point in the story where Mercy is trying to stay in a class that he's trying to take a class.
Yes.
And there's a particular line, and this is the line that made me go, I'm going to slow down and read this book because I don't want to miss any of these emotions, where I became angry. And this is the point where the professor is telling him, I don't keep veterans in my course because, and he didn't say such nice things about veterans, but I don't want to waste a seat with someone that's going to become a drug addict. And the wave of emotion I felt in that moment was one of, here it is, this veteran has served his country and has come back from serving his country, hurt, serving his country and watching friends, people perish serving this country. He comes back here and someone's telling him he does not have the right to sit in a classroom with people who've had none of these experiences. And I went, whoa. So thank you for that moment.
Yeah, that was it's funny. It's interesting how people perceive what you write, because
Yeah.
it's a powerful moment for myself, but I didn't look at it that way at the time, because I looked at it when I wrote it as a matter of a professor being arrogant and not putting himself in the space of this veteran. So,
But you hear people a lot of times say to veterans, thank you for your service.
Yes.
By the way, thank you for your service.
thank you.
And to me, as I thought about it from that moment in the book, it's not just something we should say for something that's nice. These people have not only spent a certain amount of time serving our country, but in many instances have had experiences that have damaged them.
Yes.
And they're having to recover from it. And so I'm wondering, in your experience, have you seen that, where people are trying to integrate in civilian life and they're finding themselves struggling
Most
with a
definitely.
population that not only doesn't see them as something to uphold, but something as less than?
Well, yeah, most definitely. I'm running across a good many people. It's interesting. I served with some guys from elementary school all the way through high school that we went in at different times. Some of us went in right out of high school. Some of us went in after college. And there was one guy I knew very well. I tried to reconnect with him on FB. And it's funny, we went to our first concert together. We went to Prince together. We went to see Prince.
Wow.
And we went on our first double date together. I mean, if you're 15 years old and you're a double date, you know, just going to hang out with somebody, it's a scenario where, you know, there's two girls, you don't really know what's going on. But anyhow, what we did, I went in the Air Force, he went to the Army. So 20-some years later, after we were on Facebook, and I tried to connect with him, he didn't. Whenever I reached out, he would never return my calls. I'd send him messages. I even tried to contact him through his mom. And what happened was, I was kind of upset, because I figured we have a pretty, I mean, even though we were young and kids at the time, but I thought we were pretty close. Those moments were precious moments for me. So anyhow, there was a moment where someone posted something about PTSD, and he responded. And he said, this is what I'm going through, and people just don't understand.
Yeah.
So now my anger subsided, because I realized that this brother is struggling.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, this is real. This is real. And the thing is that the problem sometimes I think people forget is that there were points in the war where we needed bodies to keep going back out there. So people didn't have time to adjust after certain traumatic episodes. So since they didn't have time to adjust, they had to go back out there. So their exposure to trauma probably intensified and was multiplied. So when they did come back, they probably were just starting to process everything. And now we see the effects of it. So, and also sometimes what I've read and what I found out is that sometimes PTSD is perceived as a form of weakness. When you say, hey, I need some help, they look at you, some of the commanders are looking at you like, you better get back out there and go do your job. But now I'm noticing that the attitude from superiors is coming down, where it's more of an emotion of compassion, and they're getting more people they're rotating them in and out of that theater at different times. So there's more time to get a reprieve, a mental reprieve. So even though they may have been exposed to something, or may not have been in a combat situation, or they just saw something, the environment is now a little better in terms of how their exposure to PTSD and how their recovery will be once they come back out of that combat situation.
Yeah, and the knowledge that people do need to process. When we don't process things emotionally, traumas, we don't actually process it by talking about it or working it through in some form of treatment or some kind of letting it out. It stays in our body, and
That's
it
right.
affects us physically.
Correct.
And so allowing, with the material, if the military and the leaders are learning more about PTSD, I mean, that's a diagnostic label, but what we do know in the human condition, that there are times we're exposed to things that we weren't supposed to be exposed to, things that will affect us and affect us deeply. And if we don't have an opportunity to take a break, take a rest, express ourselves through art, music, something,
That's right.
it gets housed in the body
Correct.
in some shape or form. Even world where they think of these videos of World War I or World War II veterans just trembling from all the emotional trauma that they were exposed to without anybody knowing that they needed an opportunity to express themselves.
Correct.
And so I'm always happy to talk with people who are kind of doing this work in a sense of connecting us to people who've had these experiences and finding a way to get that story out, because in many instances you and I would never know about these experiences unless we read about them. And hopefully we would never have to experience them in the ways that the characters in the book have experienced them.
Correct.
And that was actually another forceful part of the book, where you talked about someone reaching out to a friend and having that friend not respond at all.
Yes.
And the rationale for that lack of response actually was that person was trying to have moved on with their life. And the friend reaching out to them was actually a stimulus that was reminding them about the life they tried to leave behind.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very powerful stuff.
Well, thank you. I just try to get into the space of each person so that way I can connect with the reader.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to paint the most colorful and realistic picture as possible as an author. So and just try to be as fluid and strong as possible, so that way I can put a very good book out there.
Okay. Any next steps here? Do we have a next book, a part 2?
I'm working on several projects right now. A collection of short stories,
Okay.
and then I'm working on another novel at the time. So we'll see. I definitely like to do a variety of projects, but I don't want to be locked in to totally military. But different collection and collage of material.
You know, one thing we touched upon before, probably have like a minute or so left, probably just touch upon it, but we'll talk about, you know, the media and news media, the way it operates today in terms of how much information. There's a lot of people out there who believe that the press should be free to put out as much information as they can, and then there are many of those who think that that's not such a good idea. What's your thought about that?
I think sometimes it's a little too much, because I think that we put our men and women in danger when we give too much information. I understand the need of freedom of press. I totally do. But some things I think are just a little bit too much. And me serving in the military, there's certain things that goes on that I don't know if everybody needs to know those things. We're doing our job, but also, you know, you fear for the people who are in those zones or who are not in a war zone, who are not going into a war zone because of some new discovery. So now there's a level of anxiety that's created with the family of the soldier, of the veterans. I mean, not the veterans, but the active duty members. So now it becomes a little more intense. So I think we probably can pull back a little bit.
So in a world with the internet, in a world of our need to know and have as much information as possible, that can be a good thing, but there should be some level of common sense judgment as we go out there and exploring. My name is Dr. Fritz Gillette. This is the Ask Dr. Fritz Show. If you want to find out more information about this program, see this episode again, you go AskDrFritz.com. And there you can also go to our social media, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and hit the subscribe and all that good stuff. It lets us know that you're there. If you have any suggestions for future programs, this is what I do. I invite people into the program. We talk about what matters to all of us. Take care, and thank you for watching.